I now call the May 14, 2019 special meeting of the Riverton City Council to order at 7 o'clock. Would Councilmember Rhoda lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and Councilmember Bailey in the invocation?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our dearest Heavenly Father, thank you for the many blessings that we enjoy. Thank you for letting us live here in this wonderful city, in this wonderful state. Please bless us in all that we do. Please bless that we may make good decisions for all of the citizens of the city of Riverton, and may we keep the city in good standing and make it a better place to live, work, and play. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Mike. Would the city clerk please conduct roll call?
Yes, Your Honor. Councilwoman Carla Borders.
Here.
Councilman Tim Hancock.
Here.
Councilman Mike Bailey.
Here.
Councilwoman Rebecca Schatza.
Here.
Councilman Kyle Larson.
Here.
Councilman Corey Rhoda.
Present.
Mayor Richard Gard.
Here. The chair would entertain a motion to excuse nobody. How's that? Let's not do that. I declare a quorum is present. The chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilman Larson and a second by Councilwoman Schatz. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passes. The chair would entertain a motion to reconsider the approval of the open container permit for the Riverton Chamber of Commerce.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Borders and a second by Councilman Rhoda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion passes. At this time, anyone wishing to address, excuse me.
Your Honor, I believe a motion is in order to consider or deny before discussion.
He lost in the vote. I wrote it down right here, 6-1.
No, Your Honor, now you have before you the original consideration of the permit.
Right.
It would usually require a motion to approve said permit. It is on the floor as if it were new again.
I move we approve the open container permit for the Alive at 5, May 24th, 2019.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Hancock and a second by Councilman Bailey. Any further discussion? Seeing none.
Wait,
This would be the time, I
Now
think,
the
Your Honor, to have
discussion.
the...
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Here we go. Any further discussion? Are we going to welcome people from the audience?
Your Honor, you have yes, the mayor can accept comments from the floor.
Okay. Now would be the appropriate time. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to approach the podium, state your name so we can hear you clearly and give us your opinion of what you'd like us to do.
My name is Lisa Williams, and addressing the alcohol issue in City Park, I agree with the need to bring in more functions such as the Alive at 5. My disagreement comes in having it happen the same day as a children's splash pad opening. I just disagree with the fact that there needs to be liquor at an event like that. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
My name is Marilyn Jones, and I strongly disagree with alcohol being at the grand opening for the splash pad. That's meant for children and families. It's not meant to entertain the adults. We just cleaned up the city park. Now we're going to allow it back in under our conditions? I think it's wrong. I understand it's not the committee from the splash pad, but Alive at 5, which I don't know what that is. But I disagree with any alcohol. I don't care if there's a 2-limit drink. I don't care that it's fenced off separate from the splash pad. It's wrong. We don't need alcohol at that event. It's families and children. If they want to drink, let them walk a block up the street and go to the boot. I just strongly disagree. I don't know who is going to benefit from alcohol, who's going to make money off of it, and what Alive at 5 is, and if alcohol's at all their events. But I strongly disagree with any alcohol at this event. It's for the kids. It's not to entertain the adults. It's not to go send your little kid to go play in the splash pad while you go and drink. It's just wrong.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victor Robbins, and I'm here on behalf of the Chamber along with Rowena. And to address what the Alive at 5 is, and it's an event that the Chamber started 2 years ago, where we're trying to bring more activity and events to really an underutilized asset in Riverton. It's a beautiful park, and I think it's a chance to create more commerce, bring people out in the community, and get them to mix together. Our intent is not to be serving drinks during the splash pad opening. I think when we did the permit, it's from 4 until 9. Our band that we hired starts at 7, so we're anticipating probably people showing up 6:45-ish. 6:30, 6:45, in order to grab a bite to eat and get a seat to watch the band, a really good band. So that's the whole idea behind the Alive at 5. We discontinued it last year just because of construction on Federal, but we want to get it started up again. And I think, like I said, the park's a real asset to the community, and it would be nice to bring people out and get them to mix together. And again, not our intent to serve drinks during the splash pad celebration.
That's correct. The allowance for the extra time was for setup time, not to start serving beer at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but to serve during the time that the band is playing. And it is something that we did approach the council 2 years ago about, and we had great success at those events. There's only 2 of the council members now that are here now that were here then. But we had great success. We didn't have any drunken brawls or any problems in the park. And part of the problems, I believe, in the park are not stemming from these kinds of events. But I feel very strongly that we had abandoned the park, and therefore the city, we as the people of the city abandoned the park, didn't utilize the park. And so some other people made their choice to utilize the park in ways that we didn't necessarily like. So I think that we've come a long way in cleaning up the park. Yes, I agree with that. I know that there are no laws against drinking a beer on occasion, and I don't condone drunken stupors. So I wouldn't allow it, and it is my liquor license that I am representing for the Live at 5 in the park. So we would we've talked about it, and we will not start serving alcohol, if approved, until 6:30.
Thanks, guys.
After the splash pad event.
Thanks, Victor, Maureen, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tara Carr, and I approve your original decision on the alcohol. I want to take you back to 2013, and I attended my first city council meeting. And at that meeting, I saw Matt Wright and a bunch of little punk skateboard kids with a big banner that said skate park. And I thought at the time, wow, that's ambitious. That's really ambitious. And they made it happen. And things started changing in City Park, and people started getting excited. And then the splash pad group, wow. look where we are. It's less than 6 years later that we're here. And my thought is, this is a victory. This is a time of victory. We're taking back our park. Things are changing. And I don't really see, this is a normal event in any other town, and I understand Riverton has a history, but it's 2 beers. It's not at the same time. The Chamber puts on a wonderful event, and I, for one, am just really excited to see all the enthusiasm and excitement and the changes that are occurring in City Park and in our city in particular. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Bethany Baldus, and I'm a lifetime resident of Riverton. I think that one of the biggest things that the City Council needs to consider tonight is the precedent that comes out of this. It's hard if we overturn one event where we go after this. And so I think that it just needs to take careful consideration on where we go forward from this whole entire conversation.
Hi, my name's Debbie Anderson, and I'm a resident of Riverton. I live across the street from the park. I don't know if any of y'all live near the park or know what goes on there most of the time, but I can tell you there's a lot of alcohol in that park, and the chief has been doing an excellent job at cleaning it up. The last 2 months has been very pleasant to not look out the window and seeing somebody urinating or passed out in the grass over there. And I just think you guys want to bring the kids to the park. Do any of you let your kids go to that park? Because I have neighbors that won't let their kids go over there. And to bring beer in, that's fine. Do it when they're not having a grand opening for a splash pad for kids. It's just not right, guys. In this community, there's an alcohol problem, that and drugs. We need to start thinking and considering that as well when you're putting that beer out there in the park where we've had a big problem there. So just consider that. Thank you.
I'm Linda Bebout. I'm not related to Eli. Always make that clear to people. I don't want him to take blame for things I say. Not a lifelong resident of Riverton. I've only been here about 40 years. I am opposed to having an event serving alcohol in the park at the same time you're having an event celebrating children. I helped build J.C. Park Playground. We did not see the need to have alcohol at the opening of J.C. Park. I helped build the skate park. We did not see the need to have alcohol at the opening of the skate park. The Alive at 5 is wonderful. It brings in loud bands and it appeals to a whole different generation than mine. And I think it's great to have it. I just don't think you need to have both events at the same time. I'm also on the Hot Notes Cool Nights board. We draw a crowd of 200 people to most of our concerts, and we don't have to have beer there to do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
A little bit taller.
You might be.
I'm Lance Godey, a past councilman, as you are aware. I was present when we first grappled with this 2 years ago, and I can certainly understand any hesitations that you have had when you approved this year's request. We had them then, as many of you remember, and it should always create pause when a liquor license is requested. And given the history of City Park, I think even more so. But ultimately, I believe this event and the partnering, and I would say partnering with the Splash Pad, is a positive event for the community. They are two separate events. I think that's been clearly pointed out tonight, ignoring the confusion created by some hasty reporting that started off this furor. I think it's important to recognize that they are two distinct events. I think challenging the chamber to run a good event is certainly a wise thing to do, and it sounds like from Rowena's perspective, that's not going to be a problem. She runs good events, and that's not disputed. I also wanted to just speak to, as a member of the Solutions Committee, which specifically is charged by the council to address issues of public intoxication and substance abuse. Speaking only for myself as a member, not as the committee, I believe this type of event actually supports our mission, not weaken it. We want the citizens to take pride in and take back the city park. This type of an event, as well as the splash pad event, does exactly that. But because they are distinctly different, I think that's the key. I think that's where you can really trust in the fact that it's worthy to approve such a thing because it's a distinctly separate event. I think it's great that we're revisiting the decision. Having been a past member, I think having the discussion is a big part of it. Nobody showed up at the first time, but they're all showing up now. Okay, that's fine. And giving them an opportunity to make their point clear and not just sit at a keyboard and complain about something. So I would totally support that. But events like this should be welcomed and encouraged, not shut down. So thank you.
Thanks, Lance. Any other comments any other persons that would like to comment on this situation? Seeing none, we didn't open a public hearing, so we don't have to close it?
Correct.
So any discussion off the table?
I have a question, if I may. What time is the splash pad grand opening? Are we?
Your Honor.
Yes.
We will start activities at 5, so the bounce house will be up and ready to go. The actual ribbon cutting ceremony is at 5:30.
Okay.
And the splash pad will be open. So like the chamber had said, there will be an hour and 15 minutes or an hour between the actual grand opening of the splash pad, the ribbon cutting ceremony, and when they serve that first
Sales.
the first beverage. So completely separate events.
Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Any other questions?
I do have one more, if I may ask. Chief Murphy, and you've had no previous issues with any Alive at 5 events. I imagine it's probably the same setup. It was fenced off, limited.
Your Honor,
Yes.
may I speak freely?
Yes.
May I come approach the podium?
Please. You can do anything you'd like, Chief.
The only guy in here with a gun, so.
I doubt it. Don't ask, don't tell. So as everybody knows, I get a little passionate when I speak, and it's hard for me to sit and speak, so I appreciate the opportunity. So I'll speak freely. I am completely opposed to alcohol at the Splash Pad event. I feel that Rowena runs an amazing business. I've never not permitted her to have an alcohol permit, and I never would. I think that she's very responsible, and I feel like this event, as any other, would probably be very amazing. Here's my issue with it. It is a child's event, and I would disagree that it's two separate events. Even on the Splash Pad Facebook page, it stated that they've been working with the Chamber of Commerce for months to get this going. To me, that is not a separate event when they've been working together on this. It's the same event. It's an hour apart, and it's within close proximity. So let me just say this. The Alive at 5, I've been at the events, and I think they do an amazing job, and I'm all for it. I believe that they wanted piggyback with the farmers market, and I think that's amazing that they do that. My whole issue with this is that it's the exact same time as the Splash Pad grand opening, which is for little kids. I don't see that this is the time or place to serve alcohol. And so on a bigger thing, here's what I will ask. You as city council and the mayor have asked the police department to make a more proactive and aggressive approach to our public intox problem, to our alcohol problem. What I'm asking you in return is to take a more aggressive approach and help us help you and to not support this. And I feel like the police department has done that. I feel like every day we hear, man, you guys have done an amazing job with City Park, and we could not be happier. We're willing to do that. I'm a very aggressive person, as you guys know. I'm all for it. What I'm asking you is in return to help us and make more of an aggressive decision on this and not support alcohol at the splash pad grand opening. Every other time in City Park for the Live at 5, I'm all for it. And I'll probably be there supporting it all summer. For this specific event, I just don't agree with it.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Specifically, just because there's children there, is that?
Absolutely. I feel like we have a bouncy house. It's a splash pad grand opening. I just don't feel like that's the time or place to serve alcohol. All the rest of them, I'm totally all for it because it's more of an adult entertainment kind of a thing. This venue is to celebrate, as we've all said, a little kid's splash pad in City Park. And for me personally, I'm just telling you, I just don't feel like that's the time or place to serve alcohol. And I drink beer. I'm not opposed to that. I'm not the moral police. I would never tell people that they can't do that. For this specific venue, I don't feel like it's the time or place to do that.
Do you feel like it'll cause issues?
Not at all. We've never had issues at Live at 5, and I've attended almost all of them. We've never had one issue. My whole thing is completely because it's a little kid's event. So let it be a little kid's event.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. So the splash pad, I assume at 5 o'clock, they have a ribbon cutting at 5:30. We're looking at May 24th, so I'm just trying to get in my head here, okay, what's the weather going to be like? Do we think a lot of people are still going to have their children out at 7 o'clock? What time are the bouncy houses going to be there until?
Till 9 p.m., I do believe.
Till 9 p.m.
Them down. I'm not sure that was what we originally had, but we have a new vendor for that as a
Okay. I'm just kind of arguing myself in circles here, trying to figure this out. So my thought here is, do you think there will still be many children at 7 o'clock that are going to be there watching the live band? Or do you think most are going to say, okay, it's about 6:30, 7 o'clock, it's starting to get a little cold. I assume that water is not heated in that splash pad, so I can't assume that water is going to be super warm either. I'm just trying to figure out how long is little Timmy going to be there before they say, hey, it's getting a little cold. Maybe we should go home and let the big kids hang out and, hey, cheers, congratulations, look what we've done. We've really made a step here in Riverton. Again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. So what is your thought on that?
I raised 3 boys, and historically, those kids would stay out until midnight in freezing cold weather to play in a splash pad. And I'm just speaking for my children. I hope that there's still kids there that late at night.
Your Honor?
Yes.
Another thing I want to bring up is that in the future, when we do hold these Live at 5 events, the splash pad will still be open. The skate park will still be there. There will still be children in the park. So if you don't suspect there will be major incidents with this event, I just don't see the difference in doing it on this day to bring more people in. I know people that are coming from out of town to listen to this band and enjoy their time at the splash pad.
Sure. And so to answer that, I don't have any issues with it any other time. And I can't sit here and tell you why it is at this time. For me, it's still it's the grand opening. And I know I've said 1,000 times, I'll say it 1,000 more probably. It's an issue for me because it's the grand opening of the splash pad. And I just don't feel like that's a time or place for alcohol. I just don't. Every other time, because you're right, they're going to be open for every other Live at 5, and there's going to be alcohol, and I'm totally okay with it. I'm just not okay with it at the grand opening. I just don't feel like that's okay.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. If we need you, we'll call you. Okay. Anybody else? That's Councilman Bailey.
I guess no matter which way this goes, we have a difficult decision to make, and I understand both sides of the discussion. I guess to me, I get a little frustrated, and we've had other things that we've talked about, liquor licenses and and the Five at Alive a couple of years ago, and we have a tendency to hear that, well, we have, drunks, homeless people. The one lady said, urinating in the park and God only knows what. And then we attribute that to people having a couple of beers while they listen to a concert. And I guess to me, those two things shouldn't almost even be related to each other, because the problem that we have in the park is not from the guy sitting there having a couple of beers, listening to the concert and going home. Okay, the problem we have in the park is, like somebody says, we've sort of abandoned it, and we let the less than desirable folks take over, and then people are afraid to take their kids to the park or to go to the park themselves. And so, again, I sort of lean on the side of the more great fun activities we have that bring lots of people to the park that are being responsible and following the law and doing what they're supposed to be, the less desirable people we're going to have there. And so I guess I have a tendency to lean toward allowing this, and I fully understand Chief Murphy's point. But again, like Rebecca said, through the entire summer, those kids are going to be out there playing until dark at the skate park, at the splash pad, on the swing sets. And if there's something else going on, we'll make sure that happens responsibly. And if not, that's what the police are there for, is to take care of that. And so I think the people that are being responsible adults and following the law and doing, the things that they're supposed to in a proper way should not be penalized, because we have people that have, severe issues and problems that, in my opinion, you could take every liquor license in Riverton away and we would still have that problem to a certain extent, because they'd be just stealing mouthwash out of Walmart. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilman. Anybody else?
Your Honor.
Kyle.
I just wanted to concur with what Mike said. I have some land on 16th East, and when I purchased it, it was above my head in weeds. City beat on me and said, "You've got to cut those weeds. And not only that, you've got to cut them every year, and you've got to keep it short." So that's what I've done. And you know what? I don't have any weeds anymore. All I've got is grass about that long. And any time that you abandon something and don't take care of it, it becomes overgrown. And that park, underutilized, was overgrown and abandoned and not used properly. Now the people have come back, starting to use it, and I'm sorry if young mothers aren't willing to allow their children to go there, because I know Tim spent time there, I know Mike spent time there, I've spent time there, Rich has spent time there, and the park is not the same. I mean, the stereotype of, well, it's inhabited by undesirables is not true. It could have been, it was, but it's not true now. And Alive at 5 strived last 2 years ago. The main complaint at Alive at 5 was mosquitoes.
Well, we'll have to talk about that next.
Was mosquitoes, and the mayor got bitten for not having the mosquito killers out there, and Rowena was upset about that. We had too many mosquitoes. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Tim?
Rowena, when we had Alive at 5 2 years ago, there were two of them, right? That were at City Park? Three? And it didn't start with City Park, right? There were other Alive at 5 events, just utilizing a different venue.
There was. We had them originally started at, and they were doing.
Not been speaking to Mike.
I can't hear you all, and you're using the mic. I know everybody's
Well.
hearing me.
We'll talk.
I apologize, Your Honor.
Talk louder.
Yes, we had them originally, but we had them at different businesses, and we were trying to find a central location because we were hopping around. And as this young lady said a little while ago, she had no idea what Alive at 5 was. Well, we still have a lot of people in this community who don't know what Alive at 5 is, and we are trying to get the word out. The Chamber has worked really hard the past couple of years, trying to promote some activity, get some things going on in the community, because so many people say there's nothing to do. Well, we're working really hard trying to get things going on. And the Alive at 5 was something that we got started. We had food vendors, we had bouncy houses, we had games for people to play, adults and kids to play, those cornhole games. And
What's your cover charge?
there is no cover charge.
Oh, you're putting on free entertainment?
Yes, we are. Free entertainment. There's no cover charge for it. We're inviting the community to come. Purchase the food. They have to pay for their own food and they have to buy their own beer. But when we do these events, it's something that we're trying to get, and we want to do more of. We want to do more of them. We want to do more of them in the park. 2 years ago, we did one a month for 3 months, running through May, June, July, or June, July, August, I think, is what it was. And they were very successful for the limited resources that we had. And we used local bands. This time they've brought in a really expensive band. I'm a tightwad, so they're spending money that I wouldn't have spent so much of. But they opted to do that, and that's fine with me. And so, yeah, we just want to get some activity. We want to bring this community back to life. I know there's life here. I know there is. I see it in people doing other things. The tree lighting event, that was an amazing pulled together event by a handful of volunteers that came to do stuff. And we wanted to work with the splash pad people, not because we were joining as teammates to become partners in this event, splash pad. We wanted to kick the summer off is what we were, and we just thought joining with them at that same date to bring this community together. That's our goal. That's our intent.
Rowena?
Correct, Victor? Okay.
Rowena,
Yes.
who is the band? We got free publicity here. Who is the band?
Tris Munzik. It's my understanding that if you're a country band, they're the band.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate
You're welcome.
I had a little bit more, Your Honor. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, but you don't need to stick around.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify whether there were bounce houses and kids and all that were at the last.
Yes, sir.
So I guess Councilman Rhoda and I actually had a conversation right after the council meeting last time. And, I don't know if anybody noticed, I was the last person to say aye. Because I'm very sensitive to what Chief Murphy has been saying. And I've been very sensitive to the park. When I was raised here, my mom was not a very big fan of us going to City Park. I can't think of how many times I went to City Park when I was a kid, because she would always be talking about, people get stabbed there. And maybe it did happen, I don't know. But I know that one of the big things that Riverton has to struggle with is that park. It's a big deal. It's not just a little thing. It is, if you talk to the citizens of Riverton and you want to talk about one of the most, polarizing or just popular topics of discussion, that's a big one. Because we see it every time we go down Main and Federal, and it's at the intersection between two highways. It's a place where a lot of people can come. There's a lot of visibility. So I get worrying about it, and I get trying to clean it up, so to speak. I guess the thing that really this comes down to for me is what we want government's role to be. Do we want, as the city, to come in and say, your event is not a good event. We know better than you do what is best for the community. And I'm hesitant to do that. If we had safety concerns, like we've had with other ordinances, where we have, this is a safety concern, this is something that can help the community, or this is something that most of the community is behind, I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of the fireworks ordinance. I mean, I'm probably the only one. But I voted in favor of it because nobody said anything against it. And I don't want to sit here, I feel like we have a job as a representative to represent people. So if we have people that are speaking in favor of, they want to do it, let's do it. And it's really trying to figure out what government should do. I don't really like the idea of us coming in when there's a planned event that people are putting money into, putting time into, and saying, we're smarter than you, we know better than you, and we don't want you to do it. I think the biggest focus we've had on City Park has been don't have alcohol without a permit. That was our thing with the open container ordinance that we just recently changed. There's nothing about these ordinances that say you can't use alcohol in our parks, but there is everything about don't get intoxicated to the point you present a danger to yourself or others, and don't use alcohol in the park without a permit. And so if we're going to say you can't do this without a permit, we need to be kind of more encouraging in people getting permits. So I guess that's what it comes down to for me. It's a bit of a long explanation, but I think really it comes down to what is the role of government, and if there's really no safety concerns, and what we're concerned about more is image, I can tell you I strongly encourage the splash pad to do your grand opening another day. If there's nothing else that you can walk away from this meeting with the message that you're hearing from people, it is maybe that's not the day to do it. But I can encourage that all I like, but when the rubber meets the road, are we going to grant a permit or not? I feel like we should step out of the way and let people use the park.
Carla, you have anything?
I just really echo Tim and Mike's comments. It's been a really tough decision. It's not something that we take lightly. And we've had a lot of comments, good and bad. Believe me, I came here with a 7-Up tonight because it's really upsetting to have to think about making this decision because either way you go, someone's not going to be happy. And what we're here to do is represent the city. So that's about all I have to say. It's just that we put a lot of time and thought into this and don't take it lightly, and we take every comment very seriously.
Thank you. You know, this is an important issue, and it is important to me. I many years ago was one that said we needed to take back the park, and we've done that. We've gone out and we've put a lot of activities in that park. There's a lot of people in the room that deserve a bunch of praise for their willingness to go and help take back the park. With that said, the first person to come into my office after I was elected was Chief Murphy, and Chief Murphy said to me, what are you going to do about that? And I said, it's simple. We're going to enforce the law. And you know, we didn't write new laws. We just enforced the laws that were on the books. And he's done that. He's taken the heat. He's encouraged his guys to go do it. They put the people in the back of their car and cleaned up the mess. And in the last 2 months, we have a pretty good looking park. But it isn't going to stay that way if we don't pay attention to what we're doing. Now, that's really where I stick my shovel in the ground, is with the chief. Because I asked him to do what I needed, and he went and did it. And he asked me, and I'm going to stick my shovel with him. Now, the other thing that I'd like to point out was I and Matt Wright drove the stakes in City Park for where the park sits today, the skate park. And so until we get up out of our chairs and get proactive, there's people in this room that went out and put winter games on that were exciting and fun. And that's what we need. We need these things. I'm going to say some things right now that I'm going to take some heat for. We were trying to find a place last week where we could put the guys that wanted to drink. And it was suggested that we might put them over in the tennis court. Well, I've lived in Riverton all my life that I can remember, since I was 3, and most of my friends drink. That's just the way it is. And if I go to the park to a concert, I want to sit by Mike Bailey, and I want to talk to Mike Bailey. I don't want him over in the yellow fenced area waiting for me for him to get done being a leper, and I can talk to him. I don't necessarily even want a wristband on him. And responsible people don't have to be told 2 beers. So we're talking about a whole different segment of society. The chief's gone out and he's cleaned that up. When the chief says it's a double standard, I agree with the chief. I agree with Alive at 5. We need to take back the park. And if we need to offer adult beverages, boy, that's a great idea. If you had every choice of pop sitting out there and said, here, Mayor, is a ginger ale, I'd pass it back to you and say, I'm not drinking that. I want something that I like to drink. So I don't have anything wrong with people drinking in the park when it's responsible, nor does the chief. The real collision comes when we talk about we're going to teach children how to drink responsibly. Children aren't supposed to drink. We had that just pointed out to us over the weekend with the high-speed chase through town. There is no use for children drinking whatsoever. There comes a time of adulthood, and you got to let them go and let them make their choices. That isn't the same thing as what we're talking about. The 5 Alive in the park is a great activity. We would hope as a council to have them monthly, and we would hope that you serve alcohol. I would hope that we change our attitude about putting everybody in the cage, that they ought to be able to come out with their beer and mingle with the rest of us. So I know that's just a crazy thought. When I get home, my wife isn't going to be pleased. She likes those guys in that barrier also. But there's a real good example. Last year at the first rodeo that the Indians put on, they served beer and didn't put a beer garden in. And Chief can testify again that we had no problems. They did employ 20-some security people?
25.
25? So they responsibly went after what they did. And that's what we're doing right now with the park. We're not doing anything that isn't legal. We've tightened up the ordinances like Lance pointed out. We're using every opportunity that we have to make that a pleasant place to live next to. I'm sorry that you have to put up with what's there. I hope we can continue to fix it so you don't have to, and that you can look out the window and see families having a picnic, not a reverse situation. I think we can. I think we're there. I think we're doing it. And so my vote, I don't want to lecture you guys. I just would point out that I don't think drinking in the park responsibly is the problem. I back the chief 100%. He backs me, and so I will put my vote at that point. Does anybody else want to speak? Seeing none, let's call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 So 6, all opposed, 1. Motion passes. There will be beer, not alcohol, just beer at the park. Thank you. Now, I wrote all over my page, so we're going to go back up to item 8. 911 lease agreement discussion. Tim, are you with us?
I believe he's coming in, Your Honor. He's also working our equipment.
I thought the capacity crowd was here to hear about 911.
Thanks, Tim.
You draw a crowd.
I also send one home. Good evening, Mayor and Council and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak a little bit about 911 tonight. I need to mention right up front that the credit for this project primarily goes to our lead dispatcher, Ashley Byerly, and our network systems analyst, Adam Wyrick, for the effort that they've put forth assessing our needs, reviewing vendors, working with the county, and those kinds of things. So special thanks to those folk. You have time for a dispatch joke?
We do. Hit us.
So what did the dispatcher say when a short psychic escaped from prison? Calling all units. There's a small medium at large. Now the purpose of that wasn't to make you laugh, but a bad joke means that the presentation will do nothing but get better from there. So that's the real punch. First, I'd like to draw attention to some history about interagency cooperation that exists in the Wind River Basin. You probably know that the county, the sheriff's office, hosts law enforcement software for multiple agencies. And the cool thing about that is that if I misbehave in one town and get a verbal warning or maybe a written warning and drive to another town and misbehave again, that shared database lets the second officer in another town know that I probably don't deserve another written warning. I should probably get a ticket. And so there's some synergy there between the county, Lander, Riverton PD, and Shoshone. I bring that up because 911 is also a reflection of cooperation as it relates to agencies. About 19 years ago, it started with a call routing feature that allowed the Sheriff's Office and Riverton PD to dispatch calls for each other. So their respective public safety answering points, or PSAPs, when overloaded or were experiencing technical issues or offline for repairs, a magic button can be pushed and the other dispatch center can dispatch those calls. A really, really valuable feature that we have enjoyed in Fremont County for a long, long time. Fast forward about 9 years to the arrival of our current 911 system. It's approximately 10 years of age, and no part of that system is being manufactured today. In fact, Adam tells me that the company has been bought and sold twice since it was bought. I have personally signed invoices for parts that Adam has purchased off eBay, sometimes multiple parts, and torn them apart and put them together to build a functional component for the system that we have. So that's the situation as it relates to public safety and Band-Aid and baling wire, if you will, that we find ourselves in. So after all these years, we now have the unique opportunity to improve this foundation for public safety. And while I'm not really qualified probably to speak to a lot of those benefits, there's a couple that I think are worth sharing. One has to do with internal training. And what this means is that the county can have a representative as well as the city for training on the CallWorks system. They can become a certified tech support person, if you will. Obviously, the benefit is huge. We now have first line of defense right in the building, right? So response times are much faster. It's also the case that we get a reduced rate on tech support because, in theory, we don't have to bother the vendor near as much. Important to know. Also, our 911 calls made from cell phones automatically route to the county. So if I'm bleeding out here in town and I make a call on my cell phone, Riverton does not dispatch that call. It at least initially goes to Lander, and it gets transferred back over here. With the new system, we'd be able to process our own local calls and get financial credit from the federal 911 fund for those cell phone calls, which we don't get now. Another interesting point, the CAD mapping, or computer-aided dispatch mapping, that this system would have would provide information for all calls, the locations of both landline calls and cell phone calls throughout the county. So that's a feature that we don't have, right? We rely on other means to find out where the caller is calling from. So just some simple technology that we would probably take for granted or just assume nowadays we currently don't have, but huge. It's no secret this is an expensive thing. I believe the contract is in the packet for your review tonight, and Administrator Tolstead will be speaking probably to the contractual legality and the finances of all that and so forth. But I'd like to conclude by emphasizing just a couple of things, if I could. First, the lease purchase option before you probably makes a $300,000+ investment as affordable and as painless for a small municipality as we could probably ever hope for. Second, I'd like to circle back to the spirit of cooperation that I talked about and stress the synergy and necessity of maintaining two geodiverse PSAPs within Fremont County. So we have two very geographically separated dispatch centers. It's not likely they'll both be taken out by a forest fire, an earthquake, a flood, right? And so there is that physical separation. These two sites running the same software and configured to talk to each other, the next generation version of what we have now, would be able to run independently or as systems that are fully capable of backing each other up. And so if you take that in aggregate, those two are servicing a population of over 40,000 people. We're servicing over 9,000 square miles of Fremont County through these two BSAPs. And third, the critical factor of timing. I can't stress enough, this has been more than a dream. It's been effort by a lot of people for a lot of years. Planning, weathering political and financial cycles of two very different but very important agencies, the county and city of Riverton. All the while needing to achieve simultaneous approval, simultaneous installation, and very important, the installation of both sides by the same engineering team so that they are configured from the ground up to understand each other and these interactions. Very, very fundamentally important things. So while at some level we always have a choice, right? There's always a choice. I feel the public safety fallout from not proceeding, from not taking advantage of this window of opportunity with the county is significant. It really, really is. We desperately need to replace our 10-year-old system. This lease purchase option makes it affordable and simultaneously addresses the needs of these agencies, and frankly has taken years to coordinate and struggle to get to this point. One agency is financially able when the other is not. One is culturally, politically able, and the climate is maybe not so good for the other. And so it's a perfect storm. Let me say that? Yeah. So thank you for your consideration tonight. I'd be happy to stand for any questions if they're really, really easy. If they're not really, really easy, I'll go run the broadcast, and Adam can come out and answer those for you. And if need be, research and get the answers that we need.
Councilman Bailey.
Your Honor, Tim, is there any other system upgrades or anything that we would need to do to put this into effect that aren't included in this proposal?
Not that I'm aware of, and yeah, not that I'm aware of. I mean, it's not something you can patch. Lander, or the county rather, is now at the point where they have full support of the commission and are moving forward. And so that maybe speaks best to the timing component that I alluded to. So,
Councilman Hancock, did you have a question?
So as it stands right now, the equipment that we have, we own it.
yes,
This is talking about all new equipment, but we're not having to pay for it all right away.
correct.
Basically, kind of like if you went and got some furniture from Aaron's or something you could rent to own.
You know, the details, Tony could speak better to as it relates to, we have a lease, but yet at some point we own it. And the fact that we did budget for a payment out of this fiscal year, and so we can get that process started and be 1 year closer to owning it. And again, he can speak to those things.
But we have to jump on it by May 24th, right?
Your Honor.
Attorney, please.
Yes, the contract that you have before you, I mean, it is relatively time sensitive due to largely to the coordination that we're seeing, and that has been done up to this point. The other thing that I think I would draw your attention to with this particular proposal is it is a lot of money. 2, it wasn't something that we could take all in one chunk. And 3, the money that you see actually also contains the service agreement for all the 10 years. Which is something that isn't so we know what that cost is going forward, and that's a locked cost for us. Though that means our upgrades that I have seen in the last few years have been numerous. They come out periodically. Those aren't charged for. So that's one of the more positive items of this is that we do have that service and those upgrades included within the costs that you have before you. But like we said, the amount of money was just a little much for what we were trying to do in order to do other things as well. I am not a huge fan of leases. I don't like paying interest. That's a personal preference. But that being said, it's not real. What we have before you, as Tim pointed out, is probably one of the better deals that you can put forward right now.
I guess I'm the only one brave enough. The actual cost is $264,679 if you buy it outright. If you lease it, it's $46,366.70 a year, which totals to $324,566.90. To be safe and secure is expensive, and it is nice to have 911, is it not?
We need it.
We need it. And so we talked a little with Kristen. The numbers are kind of vague. I think, Kristen, you told us we got 24,000 last year off the 911.
That's correct. That's what was budgeted.
So when you point out that the cell phones are going to kick back that information to the Riverton PD, we'll get that money also. So we'll get closer to it. So it isn't a full drain, but we were probably spending that money somewhere else also. So I think it's really important, and I think it's going to be exciting to be able to speak with Lander and the rest of the county and not do it in pig Latin and smoke signals and those types of things. So I know it's expensive, and I was one of the ones that suggested that if we can't afford it, we ought to lease it so we have it and we're not behind. The further you get behind, the harder it is to catch up. And so I appreciate your presentation, and I just want people to realize that some of these things we talk about are kind of expensive, and we're doing our very best to keep those costs down.
Thank you.
Councilman Larson.
How long will our present system last? As long as eBay is alive, or?
Something like that. As long as we have Adam to troubleshoot and take big boxes of equipment and test motherboards, and he's a wizard.
So there is some endpoint to what we have, no matter what we do.
It's theoretically long past the endpoint. We're living on borrowed time, and Providence has smiled on us, frankly, that we have been able to provide the stability to public safety that we have, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I might, go ahead.
Councilman Hancock?
You can go ahead, Tim, first.
I was just thinking about the scope of the lease being a 10-year project, right? Did I understand that correctly? And I believe that also includes an equipment refresh. So to oversimplify that, here at the city, we rotate our PC stock and try to get 6 years out of a computer desktop for somebody. And so by replenishing a sixth of our fleet, if you will, every year, we're always upgrading. And so that 6-year number is nice to know that that's what we're getting out of just like standard desktop PC, life expectancy, if you will. Point being, as a 10-year project, we're getting server refresh in the middle of that too. So from a longevity standpoint, it's not just that we're under maintenance and support, we're going to get another batch of hardware out of the deal midterm, if that makes sense. So.
Your Honor.
Yes.
We've gotten lucky with some grants with other things. Are there any grants available or something that could help financially with this, I guess? That's more towards the chief, I suppose.
Your Honor, there might be. I haven't looked into it, but we are, as far as the deadline goes, because the Sheriff's Department is getting their upgrade, the same company is doing ours, we're a little late on that if there is. And I'm not saying there is, I don't know. But we're too late for that, even if there was.
At least for initially, but maybe down the road still might be a possibility in future.
Your Honor, I'm certainly more than happy to look.
Tony?
When I did first get here, we began having this conversation. We did not pursue any particular grants because the grants that we were finding we didn't qualify for. So there were a handful of small grants that, gave you $20,000, $25,000, which is great, but at the same time, we weren't really qualifying for the ones that I was finding. And at the point at which, given this was a year ago, the point at which we just kept running into some of those same qualification guidelines, you kind of cease, we ceased looking as much because we had to start going down that road. We probably, as the chief said, could continue to look and to try to offset this, training, any number of items that might help us out a little bit. We're always looking for those. So, yes, we sort of did look a little bit, but at some point we just weren't finding what we wanted. And we may have just missed it. There's a lot of different grant sources out there, especially when it comes to public safety, so we don't always find them all. We don't always get the right, the timing.
Councilman Bailey?
One other question, probably for Tony. I assume that Fremont County is spending the same amount we are to do their side of that project also? Or something relatively close to the same?
Yes, they have an upgrade cost. I am not absolutely sure off the cuff what it is, Tim. It's a little bit more.
So, this is a joint effort.
Pretty standard.
Yeah. We're not footing the whole bill, no.
Any other, back to me? I think this is a well put together thought, and when you put it in perspective, it's about 2/3 of a patrol car, and it's functioning every day, constantly, and so I think it's a good purchase, and I think we need to do it. And just so that everybody gets prepared for that, we have some other systems in our city works that aren't up to grade. Our court that's open tonight, because we were expecting such a crowd, I believe it's just put together with baling wire also, through the software it's running on. And I looked at the reports from Tony, there were 6,200 cases working through that court system. And so that's a ton of information. And eventually that stuff wears out and we have to replace it. And so Tim is real modest. He gives Adam all the credit, but thank goodness for our IT group, because we are held together and we do a really great job for what we've given you. So I stand that this is a very timely purchase and a good idea. Do we need a vote on this, or?
Your Honor, no, we do not. The next council meeting, you'll have the formal item in front of you for approval. We wanted it, because it is such a significant item.
Okay.
Those are one of the things we wanted to be in front of you. Your Honor, and if I could, I would echo your comments about our IT staff, about our dispatch staff, and the work that they put in. This has been a long, long time. And they've done a great deal of work, and our IT staff have worked to keep our existing system running and consistent. I mean, it sounds really bad to say baling wire and twine, but they do make it stable, because that's what it has to do, but they get creative in doing it. We appreciate the work that they do, and they deserve all the praise on those, so thank you for noticing them.
Thanks, I appreciate that. They do a wonderful job, as do most of the city, all of the city employees. Seeing no other information on that, we'll move to item 9, the landfill remediation presentation from Mr. Steve Molt. Mr. Molt, it's been amazing how long we've been searching for you. I've sat in some rooms, we thought you're lost. It's nice to find you alive. So we turn the time over to you.
Thank you. I thought the crowd was for me, actually, and talk about garbage, but I'm still here. Mr. Mayor, Council, appreciate the opportunity to come and give you another update on the old Riverton landfill. I recognize 3 of you, I think, have sat through this talk before, back in like 2015, I think, before we did anything out there, but it was at the start of the what's called it's a program that the DEQ, the state developed, well, legislature developed it, but the state DEQ is now running it. It's a remediation program that's they prioritized all the sites in the state, some 80, some old landfills, and Riverton happens to have one. And they prioritized them in like 2012, 2013. Riverton is currently number 10 on the list, and it's primarily because of its location. It's right next to the Wind River. It's east of Smith Road. So I've got a map that'll show you. Can they see my screen then, Tony? Or not? There it is.
Help if I did the one job right.
So it's a landfill that operated by the city of Riverton between 1971 and 1983. It's about 60 acres between Smith Road and the Wind River, and part of it is underneath the ball fields. So there's a bit of a concern there, but I'll explain how we've dealt with that. Currently, there's 11 wells that are monitored on a semi-annual basis. That's required and will be required for some time. The costs associated with that, our firm, Inberg Miller Engineers, has been maintaining that process. It's about $30,000 a year that the expenses to sample and get those samples tested and then report them to DEQ. So it's not an insignificant cost. Methane gas was generated. We've got garbage that's actually in groundwater. The genesis of the landfill was that it was a gravel quarry, as you probably know, and so they excavated down, removed the gravel, got to groundwater, couldn't dig anymore. We placed garbage in it, and back in that time period, back in the late 70s, early 80s, it wasn't an uncommon practice to do that. Fast forward today, we've got 80 landfills in the state. They're in some sort of status with the state. Now, we happen to be number 10. Well, back to methane gas. It became that's a danger to the public, both from environmental hazard and explosion, fire risk. So a landfill gas collection system was installed by the city in 2005. And that's running along Smith Road, kind of intercepting the gas so it doesn't get into the residential areas, and it's also protecting the ball fields. So and it's monitored on a regular basis. It seems to be doing its job. So we've not had any, we've had a few random hits, but nothing within a level that would cause us to have to go back in and do something else. So the program was developed by the legislature in 2012. DEQ developed this list, and there's a solid waste chapter 17 that manages the program. The key elements were that most communities, counties, districts who own these landfills didn't have the wherewithal to clean them up. The price tag that the DEQ put on this was significant, and so they funded it to the tune of like $45 million back in 2013. The state's currently whittling away at a few sites. There's three facilities that are actually actively in the remediation program. It's Casper, Campbell County, and Sheridan are actively in the program. Again, we're number 10, so we're down a ways. But back in 2015, Mayor and Council at that time encouraged us to take a look at the report that DEQ came up with. Now here's the site. That helps. Those little white things are just monitoring wells.
Steve, what was the third city? Casper, Sheridan.
It was Sheridan
Casper and Sheridan.
and Campbell County.
Campbell County.
Yeah, Campbell County, it's Gillette, old Gillette landfill, but it's owned and operated by the Campbell County. So DEQ developed this report back in 2012 by just taking data they knew. So no real engineering costs or studies were done. But they identified six possible corrective alternatives and put costs to them. That report's available. I've shared it with Kyle and Tony. But from that, the DEQ selected their priority to come up with costs for the whole state. They assigned a cost for the state, and that was an initial construction cost. Let me back up. The remedy they selected was the least expensive, which is probably the direction DEQ wanted to go. But the program basically is set up to, the state will offset the cost up to 75% of the cost of installation and operation and maintenance over the first 10 years. After that first 10 years, the system's up and running, supposedly. Then after those 10 years, the entity takes on full responsibility of those operation and maintenance costs. And back in 2015, when we had this discussion, you guys jumped to the conclusion, okay, what happens with a pump and treat system? Basically just pumping groundwater out of the ground, intercepting it before it gets to the treatment plant or to the river, and we're pumping it to the wastewater treatment plant for treatment. That's like, that could go on for a significant amount of time. So the fear of the council at that time was that, sure, we get 75% costs for the construction cost, which was estimated by DEQ at $161,000, and then the operation cost is really where the costs are associated. That $711 would be offset by 75%, but the second 10-year cost, that would be a city responsibility, and then the next 10 years, the cost would just continue to go up. With no real end in sight, these systems would just probably run for some time. So at that time, we looked at this and gave council our assessment of what this meant, and obviously the pros were the least expensive construction costs to the city and the state, and it was presumed that the treatment costs would be low because we're very close to the wastewater treatment plant. Now, we never really did, nobody really explored what impact it may have on the wastewater treatment plant, so there's still some concern with city staff, but we don't know what that would be and whether that treatment plant could actually become overloaded, and that would be a problem. So the cons are potential long-term costs, especially beyond the 10-year DEQ period. The source remains. We're just kind of keeping it from the river is about the only thing you're doing. You're keeping it from spreading. And then there's still risk for future methane and and other contamination if we don't have it contained. Doesn't allow for reuse of the site. So really, right now, the city is restricted, can't really do anything active on the site. And the ball fields were kind of an oversight. They should never have been placed there. And then previous activities were some grazing, and the compost area was on there at one time. Those things were probably, my personal opinion is they didn't hurt the situation, but they're not really a good thing to do on top of a closed landfill. But the fact that the waste is in water is more problematic than anything coming in through a cap. And then obviously unknown impacts to the treatment plant. So back in 2016, we were asked to kind of take a look at DEQ's numbers, come up with our own assumptions. And all we looked at the time were, we want to look at an alternative to the pump and treat. So we also looked at dig and haul, which is basically excavating all the waste out and hauling it somewhere else. We looked at, and you have these reports. This particular report is in 2016. I think it was in your packet. And I don't think I'll go into much detail here other than to say the costs to dig and haul are extraordinary. And we actually disagreed with our pump and treat costs. The construction would be significantly more what the state thought. Operation costs are probably pretty close. And then there was nothing new really in that other than we think the pumping or the construction costs were a bit more. The dig and haul is basically, it removes the source, gets rid of it, and you could put that site back into reuse, theoretically. And it's done in some places. The problem is it's such a high cost. We looked at several alternatives at the time, but really it boils down to the practical alternatives are hauling to either Sandra or Lander, or we actually looked at City of Casper. City of Casper tip fee is about half of what Fremont County is. However, the added traffic or the transportation costs increase that cost. So we're talking, $8 to $10 million, more or less a one-time cost, but still it's significant. And there's been some discussions with Fremont County Solid Waste that's outside of my responsibility, but there's always a chance that they would negotiate a special rate. They're aware of this situation. So then we issued that report in 2016, and then in meeting with the city further, it was like, okay, well, what else can we do to kind of refine these costs? So we actually wanted to get a better handle on the pump and treat, so we conducted a pump test last year, put in a well, pumped on it to get the aquifer characteristics instead of just assuming things. Well, the bad news is that formation is tighter than we expected. The good news is it's tighter than anybody expected, so the transport of water through that facility is very slow. So what that says is we have not seen a significant impact in down gradient wells over the last several years that we've been monitoring it. So the good news is it's not flowing to the river in a quick manner. And there could be actually some natural attenuation, natural treatment of contaminants through Mother Nature, if you would. But with the slower aquifer characteristics, in order to control it with a pump and treat system, we would have to put in 3 times as many wells. They'd be closer together. And we would probably have to put in a barrier wall to actually restrict flow off the site. Again, now the costs are really doubled. So $2.3 million to construct and well over $1.5 million to operate. We also looked at dig and haul in a different light. Mainly, we went out and did some more test pits last year to kind of look at the historic fill maps to see if we could whittle down the amount of waste to 650,000 yards. That didn't pan out. We still found waste where we didn't even expect it. So we think our number is still on that size. And we also were looking at, well, maybe we dug up some of the waste just to see what its composition was. It wasn't very scientific. We just looked at it and the question was, can we segregate some of it and just bury it on site if it's in there, if it's construction, demolition waste. There was some burned waste in there. I've since done some research. DEQ did another dig and haul in the state. They ended up excavating more than they expected in the beginning. So it's a very difficult process to remove waste, and especially if you're thinking you're going to not have as much, you're going to be able to segregate it or somehow. So I'm leaning towards not that being a very practical solution. So Kyle, Tony asked us to set up a meeting with DEQ. So March of this year, we sat down with the two principals at DEQ. One is the permit manager who's overseeing this site. He's in Lander, David Reed. And we've got Craig McComey, who is the landfill remediation program state coordinator. I think Craig's actually spoken to this council in years past, but we discussed the whole program. What it would take for the city to enter the program if they chose to, what would happen if they chose not to. So there's these basically just pros and cons of doing nothing. You know, we don't have a real significant impact right now. We're managing the gas. It appears the contaminants aren't
traveling,
going off site in a first way. The city still has a liability sitting there. The con part of the program is that the state may get to a point where they'll bypass you or us. I live here too, and bypass us, and the program would somehow sunset or no longer get funded. Right now, it's struggling to get funding, as everything in the state. But the one thing we did 2 years ago was attach some of the excess funds from the corrective action account. And so starting in, I think, 2022, there'll be the underground storage tank program is the corrective action account, the 1 cent fuel tax. That program is well along. They feel like they've identified most of the leaking underground storage tank sites. That's just a little background, I guess. But $2 million will be going over to the remediation program in the future to help fund future needs. So that's a good thing that this program will probably go on for some time. So in this meeting, we discussed other options, and one of the options that was mentioned early on but was never done, nothing was ever done with it, was the fact that more recently we've seen some facilities across the country, not in Wyoming, but basically this concept of phytoremediation. It's basically natural attenuation, maybe enhanced natural attenuation. So allowing the nature to kind of clean up the soils or the contaminants. What the definition in this case would be plant-based technologies using green plants to remediate and rehabilitate municipal solid waste landfills and dump sites. The fact that we've got kind of a wetland down there below the landfill now, there's about 2,000 lineal feet of separation between the edge of the landfill and the river. We don't really have it mapped. We don't have any surveying on it, but the idea is if it's feasible, this might be a considerably less expensive way to set up remediation on the site, but it would also be a long-term prospect. It would be put in wetlands, put in vegetation, let it do its thing, but it could take years. The operation costs would be probably similar to what the city's incurring now, which would be about the $30,000. The monitoring would be the same, and we would just monitor it and kind of go into a natural attenuation. We think because some of the contaminants we're measuring, without getting into too detailed, we think there's some evidence of natural attenuation going on, that it's sitting in that groundwater long enough that it's, by the time it's getting to our wells, it's showing, they're basically byproducts of some of the original contaminants is what we're seeing. So that's an indication there's decomposition going on or some kind of remediation.
Councilman Larson.
What are those contaminations? You've danced around it. What are they?
They're
chrome, heavy metals.
There are metals and inorganic PDS, chlorides, nitrates, those things that are higher than the upgradient. But the contaminant I'm talking about is vinyl chloride, which is a residue of a petroleum product like a solvent.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of an indicator that there's some solvents and chlorinated.
But the foundation or the formations down there are tight enough, haven't been fracked, so it's not, we're not seeing any movement.
Very little. The overburdened soils, the gravel was removed, so we've got garbage sitting there on groundwater. The soils below, even though it's a gravelly material, it's well, I would call it well graded, so it's packed. And then below that, below that is bedrock. We've actually got a natural barrier where the groundwater is kind of sitting on the bedrock, and so it's not permeating downward.
Last time Mike and I talked about it, Mike was talking about how much water he had to pump in his area, and it was extraordinary. Now we're finding out that we're going to have to add more pumps because the water isn't as much as you had where you were. So the landfill, interesting enough, went from closing in 2024. With the election of Donald Trump, it went to 2036, and they really haven't put a cap on it in Lander. Okay, so they don't have a date where they're going to put Lander to bed. So us carrying our garbage over there is not as important to them as it was in the past.
That's correct.
And so what, what are our real threats to the city of Riverton when we're uphill from downhill? The contamination of the river water that we are not measuring at this point because we're not a class 1 city, and we're not measuring our outflow, we're not measuring our stormwater. So I'm struggling to see your point.
Well, currently the impact to the river, I would suggest, is low. And it's probably two things going on. There's natural remediation going on, there's some attenuation going on, and then there's dilution going on. But having said that, this new study basically shows that it's not flowing quickly to the river. And we're not seeing much, even with the river fluctuations, we're not seeing an impact to groundwater. See, typically in a say a colluvial formation, you could actually have reverse groundwater where the river flows go up, you'd actually have a gradient inward to the city. That doesn't happen at this site. So no matter what the river does, we haven't seen a fluctuation in groundwater.
See, when we remediated the waste dump out at the acid plant, we had naturally occurring thorium out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the state of Wyoming refused to sell the property until that thorium had been remediated by the flow from the big wind to the little wind, which occurred, and then it was sold. But what you're saying right now, in that area, there is no flow because of the tightness of the formation, so we're not getting the dilution, we're not getting the movement to other wells, so all we really are doing is just pumping and watching so that we're not causing a problem with wells above or below that. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, we're not pumping, but we're just monitoring.
Well, monitoring, taking samples, looking at what the analysis is, and judging by those analysis from the previous one where we're moving.
Right.
So, in your opinion, do we have a problem, a future problem, or we're just monitoring past practices?
Yes, no, yes.
Good.
Not to be trite, I think the urgency is less today than it was when we first started looking at this, because of the data showing that it's not becoming worse. You know, the biggest risk out there is
elevating.
Yeah, it's not elevating. Will it continue to do that in the future? Can't tell. but the urgency is off doing something next year, that kind of thing. The interesting thing about this method would be to put some, if it worked, the state would help fund construction. Not only when you talk wetlands, wildlife preservation, those kinds of things, there'd be some other possible funding sources as well. Could help maybe get this thing constructed in a much more reasonable manner. The DEQ's interested in this mainly because they haven't done it anywhere else, and this is probably an ideal site to do something like a wetland restoration area. Again, it would just be monitoring it over time. We would hope that we're cleaning it up even quicker than just letting it do its thing. But I'd have to say that, these other alternatives, I'd have a tough time recommending doing anything at this point. Yeah, with this, it was just, we've talked to Kyle and Tony and given them a kind of an idea of what we've done a little research, basically. We've got some experts that we've tapped into that this is very feasible. We need to do a few feasibility studies, mainly look at some of the vegetation out there, soil chemistry, things like that, see what would work. So the pros are, probable considerably lower costs if this is approved. Monitoring costs wouldn't be significantly more than now. And then possible funding sources outside of the DEQ's 75% match. Again, it's not a quick fix, and it would still not allow any direct use of the site other than what we're already doing. And so that's kind of, I wanted to give the new council members kind of an update on what's out there, but I think my impression today versus where we were a couple years ago, I think this is hopeful, but even if we decide to do nothing, we just continue to monitor it. And if something happens, we'll know. We're doing statistical analysis on these results, so it's not just looking at an increase. It's a statistical analysis that really tells you what's going on between the wells and that kind of thing. So,
Councilman Bailey.
Sir, have they, and I know with other kinds of contamination, they have, for lack of a better term, microbial growth they can put in these areas, and the bugs actually eat the contaminants and is this a possibility for that landfill where they can inject something into the actual landfill area where you could get these microbial type solutions, again, which then reduces the output of contamination out of the...
Councilman, what you're referring to is typical of underground storage tank releases,
Right.
petroleum products. In those cases, it's usually considerably higher concentrations, even if it's dissolved, but certainly even if it's free product. Those techniques are very good at attacking the carbon-based, elements within that organic material. This is so dilute. That's the other thing, that these are, even though they're action levels, they're so dilute. They're in parts per billion. I don't think there's enough food stock type of thing to sustain. And I'm not an expert. I'm not a biochemist, but that would be my impression, that you need enough food to let these microbes exist.
So again, following up with that, this phytoremediation, you're saying they're letting the water flow into a wetland and then the plants are doing that?
Yeah, the plants actually take up contaminants, and they'll store it in their branches and leaves, and through evapotranspiration and other things, it basically gets released into the atmosphere.
So a similar thing with the bugs, just plants instead?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Steve, how close would we plant to what we now know as the baseball area? Would we be clear down in off the landing and down into the area more like in the shooting range area?
You're asking if where we would install this?
Mhm.
Yeah, it would be either at the leading edge of the landfill, which is that several thousand feet, or probably 1,500 feet east of the ball fields.
Okay.
And between there and the river. Now, there's some private land and tribal land between the Riverton's land and the river, so we'd have to really survey that and get an idea. But the intent was to intercept that water,
And the
not necessarily get it on the landfill, although that would probably be looked at. We could probably put something on the leading edge of the landfill to try to see what effect that might have, but it wouldn't be up near the ball fields.
The cost of that is reimbursed 70% by the DEQ and
75.
25, and 25 would be the cost of the city.
Yes. And then we have no idea what that cost would be, but it would be basically, we're envisioning it would be earthwork, digging some trenches, establish some wetlands, and planting trees and cattails and things like that.
Okay.
On purpose.
On purpose.
Your Honor.
Councilman Hancock.
And there could be other funding that could help with this in addition to the DEQ, though, which could further offset the 25%.
Yeah, we haven't explored that, but you know, I happen to know a guy that's kind of involved with Ducks Unlimited, and he indicated, yes, this is the kind of things that they fund. You know, anytime there's habitat-related improvements, there's sources, and Ducks is one. There's probably others that we just haven't even looked into.
Steve, we have a number of open ponds. Are we talking about an open pond? Or?
Yeah, we're concerned that some of this vinyl chloride is actually, it's volatile. So the good news is if you let it aerate through these ponds, you could see some volatilization, which is good. But there's such low levels, it's not an environmental risk. So I'm not even sure you'd have to restrict public activities down there. I mean, you could put in some paths and open it up to just trails and things like that, but that would have to be evaluated, whether or not we'd have to restrict public access or not.
Start fires at your own risk.
The motorboats could aerate the water, which then would
Paddle boats.
Paddle boats.
Paddle boats. Go down there with egg beaters.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you have to add to that?
No, I'm here to answer any other questions, and I'll get direction from Tony and Kyle when he gets back, and
We appreciate
proceed with that or not.
We appreciate your time.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Item 10 is Riverton Municipal Code, the RMC 5.04 alcohol beverage revision discussion. City Clerk's report, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mayor and Council, before you tonight for your review and discussion are two draft ordinances that pertain to Riverton Municipal Code, Chapter 5.04, which is titled Alcoholic Beverages. There's two ordinances, one of which is the legislative changes that we saw during the 2019 legislative session, and the other one is pertaining to one section of the code that I'll get into here a little bit later. So I'd like to briefly go over the four legislative changes that we will see changes to our code. And these ordinances will be brought before the council next week for a public hearing and first reading. So the first act was the Wyoming Beer Freedom Act, and this act allows a holder of a microbrewery permit to obtain a 24-hour malt beverage permit, but only for the purpose of selling its own brewed malt beverages. This will affect our code to allow for microbreweries to also hold malt beverage permits. But I would like to point out that we do not have any microbrewery permit holders in the city of Riverton, nor do we have any winery permits in the city of Riverton. And we're allowed to have 20, according to the Liquor Division's census. 20.
Room to grow?
Yes. And we don't have any. So that's just a formality, just to change our code if that were to change. The second is the alcoholic beverages 24-hour permit. This permit was created for alcohol distillers and rectifiers, allowing them to sell their product only at meetings, conventions, private parties, dinners, and other similar gatherings. The new temporary permit is called a manufacturer's off-premises permit, which is very similar to what our catering permit is right now. So the catering permit allows a liquor licensee to cater their bar outside of the licensed facility. this permit would allow for the manufacturer to sell their product outside of the manufactured premises. We do not, the City of Riverton or as the licensing authority, we do not issue the manufacturer's license. That's something that goes through the state. But with the code changes through statute, they're now allowed to purchase an off-premises permit that would have to be approved through the city. The third act is called the Alcoholic Beverages Business Flexibility, and it amends the statute to allow microbreweries and winery permit holders to also hold a manufacturer's license. So again, we don't have any microbrewery or winery permits in Riverton. We're allowed 20 each, and we don't have any. But if that were to happen, they could hold a manufacturer's license as well through the state. And the last of the changes, which will affect us most with our budget, is the malt beverage and catering permit fees. It was Senate File 138, and it reduced the maximum fee that the licensing authorities are allowed to charge from $100 to $50. So all of our 24-hour malt beverage and catering permits are now being reduced to $50, and these all will be effective on July 1st. There were a couple other changes that don't affect city code, but I thought you might find of interest. One of them was that retailers are now allowed to purchase liquor from other retail businesses with an application through the liquor division. They're capped at being able to purchase 1 case per week per retailer, and it has to go through the state so they can keep track of that. And then the other one is allowance for Wyoming distilleries to self-distribute their manufactured product to their satellite location as long as it is in the same premises. And again, we don't have any distilleries and we don't have any satellite locations, but if that ever were to come about, that's something that could be done. So before I move along to the next proposed ordinance or just the discussion for that, do we have any questions on the legislative changes that I can answer?
Councilman Larson.
Were you saying that there were 20? You could have 20 distilleries or 20 wineries or a combination of that sum?
According to
the city of Riverton?
In the city of Riverton, according to the liquor division census that they send out, we're allowed to have 20 microbrewery permits and 20 winery permits within the city of Riverton. And we don't have any.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
They dropped the fee from $100 to $50 that we can charge as a municipality. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So not having any, we're not issuing any of those permits. But if we got a distiller, that's why we're changing this, correct? State statute requires us to do it.
Statute requires us to do it. Now, we still have the malt beverage permits and the catering permits, and those are changing to $50 as well. Last year, when I looked at the permits that we issued, just the catering and the malt beverage permits, we generated approximately $3,000 in revenue just from those 2 permits during the licensing year. So that obviously will decrease, but with the additional off-premises, the manufacturer's off-premises permit, we might be able to recoup a little bit of that. And so where the manufacturer's off-premises permit will come into effect with the city is if we have a manufacturer that wants to come and do a tasting like at the Day of the Park or one of our events, they can do a tasting of their product. They just can't sell anything packaged. So they can sell tastings of their product only through a permit issued by the city, but they can't sell their product.
Councilman Bailey.
They're packaged.
So would that apply, I'm just trying to come up with a scenario, but if we had a beer fest in Riverton and the people that have the brewery and Lander wanted to come over here, they would have to buy a permit? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, yep.
Okay, so each one of those would have to buy a permit. So if some come from Jackson, Lander, wherever, they would have to buy a permit individually. So we might have an opportunity for income.
Correct.
Okay. And I guess it's interesting that the state of Wyoming is suffering for revenue, but yet they lower the amount that we're able to charge. So that sounds brilliant.
It's government.
The amount of money they give us.
Yeah.
Kristen, I don't understand the one case per week. Can you explain that to me?
Before it was illegal to sell packaged liquor, alcohol between licensees, retail licensees. They needed to purchase their alcohol from the state liquor division, and that way it's audited and tracked. And so now they can, if they end up short on one thing, they can buy it from their neighbor, retail license holder, and just go through the process, submit a permit, and then it will go against their $2,000 of purchases that they have to make every year.
And is that just in-state purchases?
Correct.
It would have to be from an in-state.
In the city of Riverton, our licenses, yeah.
Okay. It's clear as mud for me.
Okay. All right, I'll move on to the next discussion that I would like to bring before you, and it's going to be proposed ordinance number 19-005, and it will only affect section 5.04.220 of our code, and it is titled revocation. So through the previous discussions around renewal time of a liquor license, council has often asked what authority they have in regards to renewing a liquor license that has had violations against them during the licensing term. Pursuant to Wyoming Statute Title 12, the licensing authority, which is the governing body, has complete authority to license and regulate or prohibit the sale of alcohol or malt beverage under this title. However, if the licensee is not notified or given the opportunity to correct or respond to a violation, I find it very difficult to recommend a corrective action to be taken during the renewal process. So before you, just for your review and for discussion, which will be brought to you at the next council meeting, I would like to propose a change to section 5.04.220 titled revocation. And I'll just read what that states right now. It states the violation of any provision of this chapter, which is titled alcoholic beverages, in general. Okay, sorry, I missed my place. The violation of any provisions of this chapter by any license under this article shall be sufficient cause for the revocation of the license. That is a very vague and broad sentence that does not give the license holder, staff, or the governing body much direction on what to do if there's a violation. So what I'm proposing is not anything in addition to what is already a violation through our code and through statute. It's just defining in detail what those violations are, how staff is to handle those violations with the licensee holder, and when it has to come before council for their review. And so I'll briefly go through the ordinance just to give an example. So the violation, just for example, we have open after hours, sales or dispensing after hours. We have unauthorized minors in licensed building or dispensing room. We have failure to pay sales tax. We have sale to an intoxicated person. So there's 19 of these violations that are either referenced in statute or Riverton Municipal Code or both. And right now, if we get a violation, that's kind of where it ends, we're notified that there is a violation. I can notify the council that there is a violation, but what do we do with everything in between? And so Section F of the ordinance kind of spells it out, that if the licensee is convicted through our municipal court, that we would be notified, that the city clerk would be notified, and we'd be able to begin the process of the notice of violation. If it's not something that's through the court, and I receive notice, for instance, like a failure to pay sales tax, I receive that through the Department of Revenue, through the state. Once I receive that, it would give me the opportunity then to notify the license holder that there's been a violation, and then give them an opportunity to either fix it or explain it. And then if it's something that they either fail to fix or is a conviction, then there would be the opportunity for the notice of a public hearing before the governing body. And the governing body would then have the opportunity to review the violation, to review everything surrounding that violation, everything that the license holder has done to remedy the situation, or not, if that doesn't happen. And then the council can place fines or against them until they correct their violation. And if they don't correct the violation, then there are penalties that the council, we don't want to have to get to that point where we're revoking a license, but the council would have that opportunity after several infractions to say, this is a gross violation and we're going to suspend or revoke the license. Now, and then it also gives the opportunity for the license holder to appeal the governing body's decision. It's not as easy as when you say revoke a license, it's not as easy as just saying, okay, your license is revoked. It has to go through attorneys and through the court system. And so if it gets to that situation, there have been gross violations that are not being addressed. But I feel like with the process that we've laid out through the ordinance here, that it would give the opportunity for staff to work with the licensee before it got to the council level for there to be any action taken if necessary. And again, I will point out that there's nothing with the additional language that is changing or adding anything to what can already be done. It's just putting a process in place so everybody knows what they're supposed to do. And I'll stand for any questions.
Mr. Bailey.
Your Honor, Kristen, and I think we've had this discussion here a while back, but
Was Goody.
yeah. Of those 19 violations that could happen, to me, there's some that are far less serious than others.
Well, that was the license.
And so I guess my first question is the city council the governing body? And then if so, who would the appeal go to? For starters, I guess.
So yes, the city council is the governing body, the licensing authority. The appeal would go to the district court, the Wyoming Supreme Court.
Okay. So I think this is a really good start because, we need the ability to be able to enforce the rules and make sure that they have some teeth behind them, and this gives us that. And I would hope that they would get the seriousness if it had to come before us. So if staff couldn't solve it and all that, and it comes before us, I think, so we really, as the council, don't have the ability to totally revoke it. If we did, it still has the ability to go to court.
Correct.
With a final decision.
Correct.
Your Honor.
Governing body.
Your Honor.
Councilman Larson.
With those 19, the only one that I can remember is sales tax. And that was a letter from you to the holder of the license. And it was shown it was paid, and then they were put back in good standing and everybody moved on. So we haven't had, in 10 years, an opportunity to revoke anybody's license, have we?
That's not, it was in 2012 I believe it was in 2012 where a license was brought before the council to be suspended, and it was due to a sales tax revocation.
But it was just sales tax.
Right.
It wasn't selling to a minor, it wasn't a major infraction, it was, you didn't give your sales tax money to the state of Wyoming.
Or to the
Pretty
city of
important,
Riverton.
I realize that.
And there have been other violations of selling to minors or selling to intoxicated persons that goes through our court system. They're fined through the police department writes them a citation, they go to court, they get their fine. And so there have been those type of things that have happened. If it becomes a gross violation that every month or every quarter or every, or this one employee that is always the violating person, that the council or staff can work with the license holder to make sure that they're being responsible.
Councilman Hancock.
I guess just, first off, I would think the appeals actually go to the district court. Am I correct? I was just looking at 7, and that's, if it's an administrative process, then it goes to the district court, and then from there, it could be appealed to the Wyoming Supreme Court.
Okay.
Anyway, I was just looking at this, and I noticed in 17, it was furnishing to a minor by allowing an employee under the age of 18 to serve alcohol, and just typo, 126101, 1 through 2, that should be 126101E.
Oh, okay.
That's it.
Kristen, did you have any more?
I do not. This will come before council next week for your consideration and a public hearing as well.
Good job. From one line, one sentence to, that's a lot of red. Good job.
Thank you.
No other questions? My script says adjourn. The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn special meeting.
Adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Larson. We have a second by Councilman Hancock. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes. We stand adjourned at 8:57.